One more time. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ashley Ravichet. I'm the president of United Nations Association of San Francisco. UNA San Francisco is a membership organization, and we are born out of global conflicts of World War II, structured by the consensus of the UN Charter. Since 1943, United Nations Association of San Francisco has been dedicated to inform, to inspire, to mobilize the American people to secure global peace and security through the constructive dialogue and cultural diplomacy, centering this effort on the framework of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and, of course, the UN Charter. On this momentous occasion and anniversary of the UN Charter, we the people celebrate 80 years of an institution. Today, we're celebrating more than just the UN and the body. We celebrate the people who have dedicated their lives to global security so that peace can and will exist. It is an idea anchored to this moment, to this space, to each of you carrying the torch forward in your daily lives. And we fully realize that global rights at the local level in our communities are the utmost important. Thank you for joining our panel discussion, Charter Reform and the Summit of the Future. This program will be recorded and made available for future generations to review on our website, Charter Reform and the Summit of the Future event page. I will place the link in the chat. The goal of today's panel is to unveil opportunities to strengthen the UN Charter, a dynamic and living document, and allow it to become more responsive to the present conflicts and crises that were unthinkable 80 years ago. We will address common themes in the clarion call for reform aimed at strengthening the UN institution for more nimble approaches to addressing climate change, emerging technologies, and the need for more equitable global governance. In contrast, we will also review the outcome of the UN Summit of the Future. Forgive me. Which looked to incorporate future generations into this framework. The second half of our program will seek the perspectives of our young professional panelists who are focused on youth and future, artificial intelligence, youth leadership, and climate. I am pleased to introduce my colleague, the Executive Director of United Nations Association of USA, Rachel Bowen-Pittman, to ground us in this virtual space. Rachel is a senior nonprofit leader with extensive experience across international peace and security, focusing on medicine, science, regulatory affairs, as well as law. As the executive director of UNA USA, she leads a network of more than 20,000 members overseeing strategic initiatives that the UN's surrounded around the UN's mission. Rachel has forged strong global partnerships, secured significant grants to advance education and leadership, and directed successful humanitarian campaigns. Rachel has addressed major forums on sustainable development and advocacy, championing efforts that foster global cooperation and organizational growth. Rachel holds a BA in International Business from American University and an MBA in Marketing from Johns Hopkins University. Thank you for joining us today, Rachel. Let me go ahead and spotlight you.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you to the entire UNA USA San Francisco chapter board for this warm invitation to join you in commemorating UN Charter Day. As Ashley said, the United Nations Association of the USA, it's a grassroots movement of Americans that support the principles and vital work of the United Nations and its agencies. With over 20,000 members, 70% under the age of 26, and more than 225 chapters across the country, UNA USA members are united in their commitment to global engagement. So actually, I come to you fresh from our UNA USA US UN Advocacy Summit in Washington, D.C., where more than 150 members met with 158 congressional offices to advocate for full US funding and strong US leadership at the United Nations. This year's summit was unlike any other because we are living through what many believe is the most consequential moment in the UN's 80-year history. From the threat of debilitating US funding cuts to the global reverberations of the recent US strike on nuclear sites in Iran, the stakes for international cooperation could not be higher. And yet, it is precisely in moments like these that we must return to our roots, to the values that unite us and the vision that calls us forward. For UNA USA, the vision is found in the founding document we gather to honor today, the United Nations Charter. 80 years ago today, right here where you guys are in San Francisco, delegates from around the world gathered in the shadow of a devastating world war. They dared to imagine something extraordinary. They set aside national interests in favor of common purpose. And in one of history's boldest acts of multilateralism, they laid the foundation for a new global order, one rooted in peace, dignity, and cooperation. That act of hope and vision became the UN Charter. For advocates like us, the Charter is not just a historical document, it's our compass. It enshrines the ideals we champion every day: sovereign equality, peaceful dispute resolution, human rights, and the belief that global problems demand global solutions. The Charter created not just an institution, but a promise that the world would no longer stand idly by in face of suffering, injustice, or crisis, that we would work together, not just reactively, but proactively for peace, development, and human dignity. So today, on its 80th anniversary of the Charter, I want to share 6 enduring reasons why the UN continues to matter. First, it keeps the peace, preventing conflict, deploying peacekeepers, and prioritizing diplomacy over destruction. It saves lives, from vaccinating children to feeding more than 100 million people each year. It protects human rights, upholding justice, equality, and the rule of law around the world. It supports people in crisis, providing aid, shelter, and hope to refugees and displaced families. It drives global progress, advancing the Sustainable Development Goals for a fairer, more inclusive future. And it tackles our greatest threats, from pandemics to climate change to nuclear proliferation, uniting countries to face what no one nation can face alone. These aren't just talking points. They are the reasons why UNA USA's network of 20,000 members across 225 campus and community chapters choose to act. They are the reason our members organize hundreds of local events each year to educate their communities on the UN's impact, from classrooms to city councils. They are the reasons our members log thousands of community service hours to bring the Sustainable Development Goals to life, whether it's through food drives, beach cleanups, or mental health campaigns. They are the reason we mobilize calling and emailing our members of Congress to support US funding for WHO to stop deadly diseases and to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement to protect our shared planet. And they are the reason we speak with urgency, because we understand the dangerous consequences of US disengagement and what's at stake when global leadership falters. At UNA USA, we believe deeply in the power of global cooperation and in the enduring promise of the United Nations. So, as we honor the Charter today, let's not just reflect, let's recommit. Recommit in our advocacy, recommit in our organizing, recommit to building bridges between American communities and the global community the UN represents. Let us make sure that the next 80 years of the United Nations are not only preserved, but strengthened by the passion and persistence of people like you. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your program, and I will turn it back over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Rachel. You are indeed a dynamic speaker, as your bio suggested. We are going to be introducing our keynote, Heba Ali, who is a Canadian and Egyptian journalist. And I believe she's on screen right now. Yes, pinned. Excellent. So she is a news executive as well, and she currently serves as the chief executive officer of the nonprofit news agency, The New Humanitarian, formerly a project of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Heba has led the transition of the news agency into an independent organization, which primarily focuses on conflict journalism in Africa. Heba was named a 2018 Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. Her public leadership involves advocating for quality news coverage of conflict-prone areas and humanitarian engagement. She has been a speaker at TEDx Charmonnet and at multiple peace talks. Thank you, Heba. I am turning the platform over to you for your keynote address.
Thank you so much. And just to give a little update, I stepped down from the New Humanitarian last year, and I am now leading a new coalition that I'm going to be telling you about in the course of my remarks. Today, we celebrate 80 years since the UN Charter was signed on the 26th of June, 1945. And as Rachel outlined, the UN has served us well. It oversaw decolonization. It helped maintain peace in post-conflict settings. It eradicated diseases. It advanced human rights and helped reduce poverty. But today's world is very different than that of 1945. We see new emerging powers like Brazil, where I am today, and other members of the BRICS, taking a greater place in world affairs, and yet the UN is still run by 5 countries who won a war 80 years ago. We see a complete paralysis at the UN Security Council in dealing most recently with Russia's invasion of Ukraine or Israel's attacks on Gaza and Iran. And just to give a bit of precision there, last year, the Security Council held 305 meetings, the most in a single year since its founding, and yet passed only 46 resolutions, the lowest since 1991. In addition, we face new threats like climate change and artificial intelligence that the UN is not currently well equipped to address. And perhaps most importantly, we live in an interdependent world in which national sovereignty, which is a core principle of the UN Charter, needs to be tempered with the reality that one country's fossil fuel production or migration policy or disease control system can have an impact on everyone else. So it is precisely because of the important role of the UN and the potential that it has that we feel the Charter needs to be reformed to provide a governance model for the new world that we live in. It's as though we are using 1945 technology and it's time for a software upgrade. So for those of us who believe in the need for a universal institution to govern global challenges, for those of us who want to see a strong United Nations, I think the best way we can honor the Charter is to make it more relevant for the world of today. And we have a responsibility, I think, but also an opportunity to renew the organization at this particular historic moment. So allow me to introduce you to the Article 109 Coalition, formerly known as the UN Charter Reform Coalition, and today about to rebrand. And this is a new international campaign to reimagine the UN Charter. It seeks to rewrite the Charter and in so doing, rewrite the rules of our international order to make them more fit for purpose for today's world. And I want to just give you a bit of history to explain. In 1945, when the Charter was being negotiated, so many countries were opposed to the permanent 5 members of the Security Council having a veto power. And the promise was, the drafters made a concession. They said, just sign up for now. It's a particular moment in time, post-World War II. And within 10 years, we will revisit this question of the veto and the distribution of power. So this took the form of Article 109. And as you can see here, Article 109 calls for a conference to be held to review the UN Charter by the 10th General Assembly. And I'll come back to the details of it in just a moment. But when Harry Truman, then the President of the United States, announced at the international conference in which the UN was adopted in San Francisco, he specifically said, this charter will be expanded and improved as time goes on. No one claims it is now a perfect or final document. It has not been fixed into any mold. Changing conditions will require readjustments. So 10 years later, 1955 comes along. The topic is placed on the agenda of the General Assembly. A majority of countries are in support of a review of the Charter, but think the time isn't quite right and defer it to an unspecified future date. And today, as we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, that built-in review mechanism has never been used. I think it's hard today to argue that the time for readjustment hasn't come. So as we watch the international order collapse, as we see changes to the world we once knew in such dramatic fashion, it's time to display the kind of leadership that Rachel described earlier, that saw the UN ushered in 1945. But we need to do so before another world war instead of after it. So we at the Article 109 Coalition are in the process of mobilizing member states to try to build an alliance of countries that are ready to push for a charter review process. That requires support from 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly and any 9 of 15 Security Council members, meaning the permanent 5 members of the Security Council cannot veto a review process from taking place. We think this is eminently possible, and we've already seen several countries come out in favor of a comprehensive review of the Charter, including Brazil, South Africa, and India, among others. We as a coalition have been holding conversations with many member states who have expressed a surprising level of interest and openness to the idea, and I think the geopolitical developments of recent months have made the urgency of envisioning an alternative to the system that we have today. And we are working towards holding a ministerial conference at the UN General Assembly in September to seed the beginnings of a new alliance of member states that would push this forward in the hopes of introducing a vote at the General Assembly as early as 2027, and then launching a charter review process in 2030 as part of a post-SDG agenda. But this can't be done by member states alone. We, the people, of course, have an important role to play. And so we're also building a civil society movement and invite you all to join us. My dream is to see climate activists and the Gaza student protest movement and those advocating for greater civic engagement in international affairs and those fighting for gender equality, all of us to come together under an umbrella that demands a United Nations that better serves we, the peoples. So I invite you all to become members of the coalition and to join the many other civil society organizations that have already become part of the coalition. You can see some of them here. They range from think tanks in Brazil, as I said, where I am today, to peace-building organizations in Africa, to campaigning organizations like Oxfam. Our most recent member is the Club de Madrid, a forum of more than 100 former heads of state. And this agenda, as ambitious and radical as it might seem, is actually supported by quite a number of high-level advocates. And you can see some of them here from every region of the world, including the United States. It was also a recommendation that emerged from the UN Secretary General's high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism. So, as I say, not as crazy as it may sound. I want to just speak very briefly to some of the concerns that often emerge when we talk about reforming the Charter. And you might be asking, is this really the right time to open up the Charter at such a polarized, geopolitically toxic environment? So let me just speak to that before I wrap up. No change to the Charter can take effect unless it is ratified by 2/3 of the General Assembly and all 5 members of the permanent Security Council members. So it's a very, very high threshold to meet. And I would challenge the assumption that a majority of countries would actually agree to something worse. Second, the process itself could have many benefits in improving the polarization that we're seeing today. And we have to remember that in 1945, only 50 countries were at the table when the UN Charter was signed. Most of Africa was still colonized. So the vast majority of the UN's 193 member states have not had a say in shaping the rules of the game. And I think by addressing some of the historical grievances of those countries who have felt that the system isn't working for them, we incentivize them to show up in good faith. All of that said, there will never be an easy or perfect time to reform the UN Charter, but it is often in times of crisis that reform is most possible. And I think we're pretty close to hitting rock bottom today, and that gives us an opportunity. This process will take a long time. So we're not talking about doing this tomorrow, but we know that the governance that we have today is not the governance of the future. So let's lay the foundations of that future. And when the political window of opportunity opens, we will be ready. And finally, I think we have to ask ourselves, if we do nothing, what is the alternative? The current trajectory is leading us to the brink of nuclear war, to environmental catastrophe. The current path isn't tenable, so we have very little choice. And I will say, when we raise this question with member states, we're often cautioned not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But what baby do we have today, at a time when major powers are invading other countries without consequence? What do we have left of the so-called rules-based international order that we are so afraid of losing? A former UN Secretary General once told me that the UN has always resisted change for fear that change could lead to something worse, and that it is precisely that lack of evolution that has led the UN to slide into irrelevance. Another senior UN official, or former senior UN official, put it even more starkly. She said, "In all of my years, I have never been so pessimistic about the UN. We don't have time for incrementalism anymore. It is reform or die." So we have seen the Secretary General now announce a set of reforms known as UN 80. Unfortunately, this looks very much like a cost-cutting exercise that lacks a vision for what a new international social contract should look like and what the UN's unique role is in that. We urgently need to build that vision, because otherwise the UN could, as one analyst recently put it, become a skeleton within a short matter of years. And to quote Brazilian President Lula da Silva during his UN General Assembly speech last year, he said, "I have no illusions of the complexity of a reform like this, which will face crystallized interest in maintaining the status quo. It will require enormous negotiation efforts, but that is our responsibility." So on this 80th anniversary of the UN, I invite you to join us in the movement to renew the UN Charter so that it can more equitably distribute power, so that it can enable the UN to address emerging threats, and so that it can empower the UN to deliver on that very core purpose of maintaining peace and security. And our collective future depends on that. I will close with the words of Nelson Mandela, whose spirit inspires and informs our coalition. "It always seems impossible until it's done." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heba. Powerful words. Thank you for setting the stage for our conversation today. I will be bringing you back into the panel later on, but we are now going to transition to the first part of our conversation, which is diving further into charter reform. It is my pleasure to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Soon-Young Yoon. She is the New York representative for the International Alliance of Women to the UN. And in 2020, she founded and is currently co-director of the Cities for CEDAW Histories and Futures Project, among many other things. This could take the entire panel just to sing her praises and her accolades. She is a colleague, a friend, and a mentor, and I will pass the conversation to you, Dr. Yoon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our two speakers for really covering a lot of ground and opening up the conversation for us. So now we're going to dive into the topics more deeply from slightly different perspectives with a very interesting intergenerational panel. And it will be in two parts. First, we're going to take a look at a little bit more about the charter reform. What actually is this going to look like, and why should ordinary citizens even care about this? Now, Heba did talk about that, but we're going to hear a little bit more, which is great. And the second part, we're going to ask some younger generation leaders to think about making the Pact for the Future a reality on the issues of peace and security, sustainable development, digital cooperation, from the point of view of how youth can be involved in this process of UN Charter and UN reform. I should give you a heads up that at the end, let's think about the one or two sentences of your wish or your aspiration for your country's leaders on what they would do to act on this. It could be your mayor, it could be your governor, it could be your president. And so give it some thought as we listen to Augusto. So our first speaker, Augusto Lopez Claros, is the Executive Director and Chair of the Global Governance Forum. He has been driving the process to draft a second charter, which we will hear about today. Augusto is an international economist with over 30 years of experience in international organizations, most recently at the World Bank. He was a senior fellow at the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. And earlier in his career, he was the chief economist and director of Global Competitiveness Program at the World Economic Forum, which you all know takes place in Geneva in Switzerland. Augusto, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure and an honor to be with you today on this very important occasion. I think that Heba already referred to the statement made by President Truman to the effect that the charter would be a living instrument, that like the US Constitution, it would be amended to reflect changes in world circumstances. And of course, we know that that has not been the case, that the charter has remained essentially a frozen instrument. And it's because of this inability to adapt to the changing environmental situation, that the United Nations obviously is struggling and trying to become relevant in a world in which other mechanisms for international cooperation are being created. What I'd like to do today is just give you a little bit of an overview of the second United Nations Charter project. This is a group that was convened by the Global Governance Forum some 3 years ago. In 2023, we released a paper making the case to modernize the UN Charter and calling for an Article 109 conference. A one-page declaration, which was issued at that time, was immediately endorsed by 20 Nobel laureates and dozens of senior officials, former prime ministers, heads of state, and other prominent individuals. Over the next 15 months or so, we rose to the challenge of actually coming up with a version of what a 21st century UN Charter could look like. Yes, we were agreed that we needed to modernize our global governance architecture, but what does this actually mean in practice? We decided that we would build on the existing charter. The 1945 charter has a number of strengths. It was a very innovative document at its time. And we felt that rather than creating and starting something completely new, starting from scratch, we would build on that existing instrument. The UN brings 193 countries together in a process of international cooperation and dialogue. It has many flaws, but we decided that it would be better to look at those flaws and to see if we could come up with something that was more fitted for purpose, that was more in agreement with the needs of the world today. Some of these needs have already been mentioned by Heva. Climate change, the very unsettled security situation, rising militarism, and persistent problems with poverty and income inequality, and a range of other global challenges that we face, which cannot be solved outside of a context of much stronger international cooperation, which is what this second charter is intended to do. So essentially, we have three kinds of reforms in this second charter. The easy part is to do away with references to enemy states, to do away with some chapters, such as those dealing with the trusteeship system, that are no longer operational. The decolonization process came to an end. The last trustee territory was incorporated as a UN member in 1994. And therefore, it is quite feasible to simply do away with major portions of the charter without any controversy and without altering in any way its essence. We also decided that we would do what we call normative advances. The UN Charter is a document that is pre-climate, it is pre-nuclear, it is pre-digital. The word environment or climate does not appear once in the 1945 chapter. And yet, if we ask ourselves what is one of the greatest challenges that we face today, it is our inability to address in a meaningful way the calamities that are coming our way associated with the way in which we have put enormous burdens on our planet. So as part of these normative advances, we have, for instance, added a new pillar on the environment. We have created a new organ called the Earth System Council. The idea behind this initiative is essentially to create a mechanism that allows us to coordinate environmental policy, to harmonize international environmental law, to oversee the negotiation and implementation of global environmental treaties, to establish a global environmental authority under the direction of the Earth System Council, so that it would become like an executive organ of the Earth System Council and assume the functions of UNEP. In other words, what we have done is create a mechanism that will allow us to address in a more coherent, more intelligent, and more effective way the whole problem of climate, which is perhaps one of the greatest catastrophic risks that we face as a human family. And what we have done for climate, we have also done for human rights. We have created drafted a new chapter and converted the Human Rights Council into a full council with all the authority that it deserves, so that we can turn the human rights framework that we have into something that actually delivers these rights to people on the ground. We give the UN the capacity to finally go beyond lofty statements about the existence of particular rights and to try to turn those into reality. The bulk of the proposals that we have in the second charter are what we call structural changes, addressing some of the limitations of the current charter. We have, I think, very innovative proposals for amending the Security Council, reforming the Security Council, addressing the issue of representation by expanding the membership from 15 to 25 countries. But we do this expansion in a fairly innovative way that creates, for instance, 5 new positions for 6-year renewable terms that, for instance, would allow a country like Brazil, where I am today, to essentially become a semi-permanent member of the Security Council, because Brazil, being the most populous country in Latin America, having the largest economy, would essentially sit on the council and this 6-year renewable form, more or less permanently. In the revision to this charter that we are putting forward, we are changing the organization from a organization of states into an organization of states and peoples, to address one of the long-standing criticisms of the United Nations. You're probably aware, in 1947, Albert Einstein wrote an open letter to the General Assembly in which he said that the members of the General Assembly are diplomats. They represent the interests of the party in power back in the capital. And he said these diplomats should actually be elected directly in their respective countries so that there will be a greater connection between the organization and the people that it seeks to represent, consistent with the very first words of the charter, "We the people." Right. So we propose the creation of a bicameral structure where the Parliamentary Assembly is not one country, one member, but it's rather a group of parliamentarians that are elected under the principle of digressive proportionality. In other words, the larger countries get more parliamentarians, but we do this in a way that the smaller countries get proportionally more seats than the larger countries. And the idea essentially is to have a body where the loyalties of its members are not going to be to the country from which they come, but are going to be to the people which they represent, and under the assumption that these people are going to be more closely identified with the pursuit of particular causes, whether it is gender equality, the climate, human rights, and a whole range of other issues which currently are very much the locus where civil society organizations operate. A couple more examples, because we have a time limitation. The second charter proposes a new way to elect a Secretary General. You know very well the system that has been in place for the last 80 years has the undesirable feature that because the candidates can be vetoed by the permanent members, there is a tendency to go for the lowest common denominator very, very quickly. And this doesn't serve the interest of the international community at a time when we have so many urgent problems that need to be addressed. So in our revised proposal, the Security Council can continue to nominate people. The General Assembly chooses 5 candidates, and it sends them to the Parliamentary Assembly, who has the final word on the election of the Secretary General, who then receives a 7-year non-renewable term, because we want the Secretary General to be basically free to speak truth to power, not to have to worry about the renewal of his term, and to begin to play politics, which is what often happens with international organizations, where the head of the organization, has the possibility of a renewal second term. The second charter, a copy of which can be downloaded from the website of the Global Governance Forum, also has an amended statute for the International Court of Justice. It is not included in the published document, but it is on the website. As you know, the original charter has the statute of the International Court of Justice as an integral element of the charter. So we have done that as well. We have worked with some of the world's top legal experts in bringing together an amendment to the International Court of Justice statute. I don't have the time to go into the details, but I invite for those of you who are more legally minded to look at it and to examine it. Let me conclude by simply saying that I am not myself overly concerned about the possible constraints on the review conference and on these initiatives to take a second look at our global governance architecture as a result of the current, very complicated, somewhat toxic international geopolitics. The fact is that we don't have an option at the current moment. The status quo is not an option. We are doing nothing and postponing into the indefinite future amendments to our global governance architecture are going to lead us to calamity, are going to result in enormous human suffering. climate change is not going to wait for the political will to coalesce around meaningful reforms in the next 20, 30 years. That is not the way the Earth works. These crises are going to be upon us, and therefore there is particular urgency on this 8th anniversary that we do convoke this review conference, that we work with other civil society organizations, and we try to persuade member states to finally take that step which they promised back in 1945. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Augusto. I think we'll be returning to you at some point after we've listened to what our youth leaders are going to share about their views of the Summit of the Future, the Pact for the Future, from their own experiences. They all come from different backgrounds, and we are very interested to hear, first of all, from Kome. Ashley, are we all together, or are we doing one by one here?
You can introduce however you'd like. I will spotlight as needed to move the conversation so we see your beautiful faces with your beautiful words.
Okay, then we're going to bring all three of you together so that you can ask each other questions if that's what you want to do. So let's bring Kome Ter, Jessica, and Cash. And let me introduce Kome Ibochidi, who is a senior product manager at ServiceNow, and her specialization is in AI and something called conversational experience products. I'd love to hear what that is. Her focus is on the intersection of technology, social impact, and global development. She also holds leadership roles in the UNA National Capital Area, that is in DC, their Young Professionals Program, and their Women's Empowerment Initiatives, where she tries to bridge the gaps in AI and with the SDGs. So Kome, you have the floor, we're listening. And Jessica and Cash, you're gonna think of questions if you wanna ask her.
Sure, thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Koma, and I would answer a little on what the conversational experiences is. Now, when we talk about AI, we're speaking about artificial intelligence, and basically conversational AI is just the ability to utilize artificial intelligence to help you interact using natural languages, kind of like what you see in our day-to-day chat GPT, ask questions, get answers, get to do things as though you're communicating with a human. So that's really what the conversational experiences are in that sense. But kind of like diving back to why we're here, I like to say that I believe I represent a generation that has grown up so fast in a very digital acceleration age. Climate disruptions, very different from how it was in some 50, 80 years ago, and really an institutional mistrust in the way that the times really unprecedented has posted to us. And one of the things that I see about the reforming the UN Charter has really been things about, I really feel like the questions is more about what does reform actually mean for, people that is supposed to serve, especially when you look at the younger generations, people that look like me, people who are really in the age where they're very fast, easily distracted, not watching the TVs, not reading newspapers, not really trying to know what's happening around them. But these are like the generation of people that we're going to become, or that is really coming off. In some ways, you're called the Gen Zs and the, millennials. Now, when I think about this particular people, it resonates more to myself. And I see more about the path for the future and how laid out several actionable steps have been, and more of promising things about commitments like strengthening the role of youth through the future generations, envoys, and even structural youth engagement as well. Thinking about diving forward the global digital compacts and really ensuring things like ethical AI, digital inclusion, internet access for all, and I'm a bit more focused in artificial intelligence and technology because that's a space that I've been in for a while and I've thrived. A space where a lot of things are changing globally, yet there are a lot of young people who are committing into what we call artificial intelligence for sustainable development. So it's really make me think about what is more meaningful for youth and how impactful we can all get into that direct level of engagement as a tool to create change. Thank you.
Thank you, Komi. That was concise. You explained everything we needed to hear about what conversational experience products, but you linked it so nicely to some of the various parts of the UN that it relates to. Do you want to say a little bit more about the Global Digital Compact?
Yeah, sure. So when we think really about artificial intelligence and the digital world, for instance, it can really be more like an equalizer. And what I'm thinking about is how can we utilize how can the UN have like a more inclusion for young people in the digital age? And now that's like cutting across several sector, utilizing of social media, utilizing of AI tools, utilizing of several technological advancement to really harness the core of all of the various aspects of the UN, reform. How can we herald our voice? So we're talking a lot about how things are changing, the space is changing, but how can the young people, because when we think about reform and when we think about progressive future, people of my generation and my age aren't really wanting to sit in meeting venues and having conversations. They want to be in their houses, in front of their phones, right, having their cameras and speaking their voices. But how will they know if those information isn't passed across to them? How will they know if it's not passed across to them in the language that they understand? So they're really not reading newsletters as well. So if you're sending broadcasts and newsletters, our generation isn't, reading, but these are the generation that you need to be able to push forward. These are the generation that you need to be able to ensure the consistency of sustaining the reform that we fought so hard to keep over the years. So when I speak about, that level of digital reform, when we're talking about even the progressiveness in terms of digitalization and artificial intelligence, is really bringing what we already have and bringing these reforms and bringing this innovation in the language that the next generation understand they can thrive and drive with.
Komi, you made that such an important point, and Jessica's going to answer how you're going to do that. Not quite, no. So let me introduce Jessica formally, if I can do that. She is the representative for the Mid-Pacific region, UNA-USA National Council, and member of the UNA San Francisco Advisory Board. In that capacity, she focuses on advancing strategic collaboration, meaningful dialogue to build a stronger and more vibrant community. Those are the words that she wanted us to put in her purpose. Jessica also has been a major contributor to the International Organization of Youth, which she's going to tell us a little bit more how important that group is, and currently serves as the executive assistant to its founder. Jessica, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Yuan, and thank you, Komi and Kash, for being on the panel with me. It's such a pleasure to be engaging in this conversation with you. I just want to touch base on what Heba said about the UN 80 initiatives, because I know she mentioned about the UN 80 initiatives, and I do want to have a coherence in our webinar today and how we actually relate our discussion points with the previous speakers. So the UN has been making efforts to streamline operations and make them more efficient and cost-effective in the UN 80 initiative. The initiative underscores multilateralism as an effective means of uniting countries to combat global challenges. The International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD, noted in 2 articles dated April 30th, 2025, that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres highlighted that the UN 80 initiative supports the implementation of the Pact for the Future. Now, going into the Pact of the Future, And I do want to put in this overview. It's a very short overview of just 2 pages that actually touches upon some of the items that Kome talked about previously. So I can also share my screen so that we're actually following the pact. And so here you see that this is the Pact for the Future, what it delivers overview. And the pact provides an overview. So this overview summarizes what the Summit of the Future is, the impact of the Pact for the Future, and areas of focus that the pact strives to advance. Then you see what action items have been planned after the summit. And when we talk about continuity and increasing civic engagement, it's important to put action items on how the goals of the summit can be carried forward. And here you can actually take a look over here. So the action items are right here, summit follow-up in this section. So in each section, let's look at the sustainable development and financing section. So this section, the pact propels sustainable development to go beyond 2030, but of course, attempt to accelerate progress towards meeting the global goals. The pact also has a section on climate and environmental affairs. And on this section on international peace and security, the pact emphasizes diplomatically settling conflicts and disputes in a peaceful manner, also calls for sustaining peace, protecting civilians, scaling humanitarian assistance, increasing the use of innovative and anticipatory financing mechanisms, advancing the implementation of commitments that safeguard women and youth in the context of peace and security, promoting counterterrorism efforts, preventing and fighting transnational organized crime, and avoiding weaponizing emerging domains and technologies. And one significant achievement of the pact is to have a recommitment to nuclear disarmament, namely to the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons and having solid steps on all aspects of disarmament. Now, on the section on science, technology, and innovation, STI, and digital cooperation, the pact aims to reduce global disparities in science, technology, and innovation by introducing measures such as scaling up means of implementation. And that is, the pact aims to maintain well-being and improve the health of society through addressing barriers to access issues, broadening or increasing the opportunities for participation, and advocating ethical and responsible development and use that respect human rights. For example, increased use of science in policymaking was also emphasized. Now, on youth participation, the pact calls for strengthened support for youth participation at the global and national level and in various capacities. The pact also emphasizes the importance of multilateralism in shaping a world with complex relations, means to peaceful engagements, and modes of sustainable living in this section, called Transforming Global Governance. The Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations are 2 annexes that are part of the Pact for the Future that have also been adopted. So for the summit follow-up, we see that in 2027, a high-level review for the Global Digital Compact is expected to happen. In 2028, a high-level plenary meeting for the Declaration on Future Generations is expected to happen. And in 2028, a comprehensive review of the pact will take place at the Heads of State and Government meeting at the beginning of the 83rd session of the General Assembly. You can see that progress did not stop at the adoption of the pact. Ongoing efforts have been made to accelerate the implementation of the Pact for the Future. And one way that ordinary people like me can continue the effort is to engage in organizational efforts that actually propels the action items that have been discussed in this pact. So for example, by engaging in a nonprofit organization called the International Organization of Youth, IOY, I helped to plan conferences, to enhance collaboration and partnership, Under IOY, a Council of Future Generations called CFG provides the space for emerging youth to actively engage in global policy dialogues, strategic planning, and advocacy. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Sun. Yung.
So I am so glad you ended up with an explanation of the IOY. I believe you also helped with the UNA to convene the youth conference during the General Assembly in September. Is that correct?
Oh, actually, do you mean the Youth Assembly as in
Yes,
part of the
yes.
International Youth Conference?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So every September, so the International Youth Conference is held twice a year. Once in the upper half of the one in the upper half of the year, and the next one is in the later half of the year. And around in September, we actually have the International Youth Conference that would be held in New York.
During the GA, as I recall.
Yes.
So I'm sure that you are both aware of something called the Youth Envoy in the Secretary General's office, who has been appointed. And I'm curious to know whether or not you have any ideas or recommendations on how organizations like IOI or COMES, your ambitions to bring the youth perspectives, what would be your recommendations to connect with the Youth Envoy?
And Dr. Yum, I presume this would be, so we're talking about Dr. Pollier?
Yeah, the person who is actually the Youth Envoy in the SG's office.
Yes.
So what would you recommend for that person to do? To be able to, what is that person's job as far as you're concerned? Come.
Yes, Come.
Okay.
What do you want this person to do? We'll make sure that he listens to this.
Yeah, I was waiting for Jessica because I felt like.
Oh, yes. I think we've been too humble in this panel.
But I think I can recommend 3 things. And one would be really helping strengthen the role of youth, you know, through the office, and how to really do that would be more structured youth engagement and youth communication, help foster global digital drive and digital inclusion as well in the day-to-day affairs that has to run. And then really just strengthen a community of intergenerational fairness, because now as the leader in that space, you're representing all of us, you know, and it's important to know that just as you're in there, you want to, I'm very against where a lot of, you know, I like to say a lot of grown-ups use the term they're the future, you know, they're the next generation, the future of tomorrow. And I'm like, we were hearing that for when we were kids in preschool, high school, in college. Now it's really important to know that right now the future really belongs to the youth, and we need to be able to co-author the level of future that we have now. So it's important that in your place, right there, you want to speak for the youth, ensure that you're in rooms where young voices need to be heard, ensure that there are mediums where young people are, you know, excited about. I'm not going to wake up in the middle of my morning trying to be, you know, paying attention to, for example, let's say, one of the acts, maybe an Article 108 of the UN Charter or something like that. I'm really not thinking about it. But one thing that I'm very particular about is how can I access, you know, tools for education, tools for activism, tools to be able to distribute these things that I believe in. So I would say pay attention to ensuring that decisions are made where youth are, as well as bringing together sustainable groups of young people that can help strengthen you as well. You're really not alone. We're all working with you, and we're excited to work with you.
There you are. And I am going to let Kash come in because he's also going to join this wonderful conversation. Kash McCarty is from Sacramento, California. He's an incoming freshman at Princeton, majoring in international relations. He thinks of himself as a sustainability advocate. So he's going to talk about that a little bit. And he has served as liaison for the Sacramento City Unified School District, where he has helped pass a resolution establishing guidelines for food waste, green schoolyards, and gardens. He is a graduate of the very first cohort of the California Youth Climate Policy Leadership Program, and he has written op-eds featured in the Capital Weekly. So, Cash, tell us about your organizations, your work, and your reaction to what has been said here about youth leadership. And what are some of the problems of getting youth involved with the UN?
Thank you so much, Dr. Yoon, for the great introduction. So like you said, I'm Cash Marquardt. I have been active in various local governmental spheres, including my school district, as well as advocating for climate policy on the state level. And as a young person who's been active in local government sustainability efforts, I've really seen kind of both the power and the limits of climate advocacy. Advocacy really does make a difference because it grows awareness and people start to care. But the hard truth is that climate advocacy doesn't always translate into real enforceable action. So even when I was trying to advance policy at my school district at the state level, much of our action fails. So it's no surprise that at the global level, ambition also often gets trapped in the bureaucracy. And I'd like to kind of center our conversation around the Pact of the Future. And like it was said earlier, to make it meaningful, we must operationalize it. It can't just be another aspirational document outlining guidelines. We can already see that many UN member states are not on track to meet the 1.5-degree goal set in place. So now more than ever, it's really a time to act to ensure that we safeguard a future for our younger generations. And I also want to kind of talk about how climate is not just an environmental issue, it's also a social injustice. And as a low-income student as well, I've seen firsthand how climate change disproportionately affects our communities. It's really kind of tied to urban heat island effect, poor air quality, food deserts, all of these things that disproportionately affect low-income, impoverished communities who often don't have a seat at the table to kind of voice their concerns. And yes, I know it's often repeated like Kome said, but youth will be the most affected by climate change and we are the future. So we don't really have the luxury of viewing this crisis as abstract or political. It's really personal, it's existential. And older policymakers may not live through the full impact of their decisions, but we really will. And I still remember the California fires 7 years ago, the Camp Fire in, I believe, Butte County. And 7 years ago, as an elementary schooler, I had to miss school because the smoke was just so concentrated within the Sacramento Valley. So my recommendations are that we really need to elevate youth to the frontline voices and permanent positions of influence. And we also need to bring in forward-thinking governance models, like Kome said about the AI, like something that we can learn from is Bhutan's gross happiness model. And I know that takes into account a lot of environmental sustainability aspects, like Bhutan is the only carbon negative country, which means it actually absorbs more carbon than it outputs. So things like that, as well as energy models, like using biogas in developing countries to help take that methane away from food waste and start implementing it in the development of these countries. We just really need to build green infrastructure like permeable pavers and tree canopies in these countries that are already developing so they don't have to retransition from fossil fuels. And the Pact of the Future is really a great start of this, but we really need to walk through it with institutional courage. And I'm fully supportive of reforming the charter to involve these things. Like Dr. Lopez said, I believe, the charter does not mention the word climate. So it's just really important that we put all these into the spotlight and create binding climate obligations.
Well, you just answered the question I was going to ask you, which is, what is the connection to the charter? And do you think that among your advocacy community that you work with, do you think they are attuned to the UN Charter reform at all? Is this a totally new idea for you and for them, or is it something that someone has given thought to? Tell us a little bit about what you think they're thinking.
So personally, I feel like as youth leaders, youth change makers, we're often not able to kind of step foot into international agencies like the UN. We're kind of, I wouldn't say alienated, but I can't think of a better word, from those larger organizations. just because of how daunting they may seem. The UN is an absolutely amazing organization, and it connects everyone from around the globe. And I think for people my age, we kind of want to step more into local to state advocacy pathways, because that's where we think we can make the most influence. But that is also why I think it's so important to talk about the UN and talk about global governance, because these things can really trickle down instead of starting from the ground up. Building downwards is just a really important.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask Jessica and Kome if you have any questions for Cash. Or for each other. Cash, you can also ask questions for them. This is your I have a question period before we get back to our other panelists.
I could ask a question to Kome. I know AI has a lot of implications in the climate sphere as well, like data centers taking a lot of energy. So how do you feel that these two fields can kind of converge to make a healthier future for us all?
Thank you for the question. So first, I'd like to start with, we have what it's called the ethical AI, and really ethical AI get to ensure that the several artificial intelligence tools are utilized for possible and common good. But now when you see through the dynamism we have in the climate space, I always look towards, transparency and accountability as well. So AI doesn't manufacture itself. AI is not used by itself. There's always human in the loop who have to, get into the AI algorithm, AI programming, AI data validation, or AI, extractions in that sense. So when it comes to algorithms, when it comes to ensuring that we utilize AI, it could even be for news spreading. It could utilize, how to disseminate the information as concerning climate across to different, to the world in general, is how do we ensure that the news which is going out there is true, the news have been vetted ethically, and those information can as well change the climate governance situation. So when we think about it, it's more about how can we help with resources that go into risk data as well. So I think it really boils down to less about, we all fundamentally, AI would have or come with its own risks and issues. Now, when we're thinking about climate, is even worse in itself, because a lot of news are out there, and sometimes it's difficult to even validate true news from untrue news. So it's really thinking about the resources that should go based on risk data, how to ignore first news, how ethical AIs can be put in place to ensure that we have information not concerning our climate alone, but we're also accountable for like climate justice. We're accountable for things like equity, and also upholding justice that can be coded in from the very beginning, and ensuring that even the climate AI space includes everyone and that there's really no harm to anybody.
Yeah, actually, I have a question for Cash. So, Cash, speaking of charter reform, how do you think minors can have a meaningful engagement in this effort? Minors as in young people who are under 18.
Yeah, so me personally, I'm 18. I mean, under 18.
You
I'm
just
only
made it into the majors.
Exactly. So I think even just sessions like this, where we're able to get our voice out there and get our ideas heard, because minors, we don't really have a decision-making role anywhere, really. I mean, we can't vote until we're 18, of course, and certainly not in UN spaces. So I think areas in which we can get our voices out there, which I'm so grateful for the UN Association of San Francisco for putting this panel together, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to kind of step into this position. But even just sharing my ideas, I hope that other people can take some of what I say and implement it into their own ideas for charter reform. It's a really complicated question, Jessica. Thank you so much. But I really hope to see more voice for youth in the future. But I think right now we're in a position that it's not really possible to be directly involved. But I hope that my voice can kind of come through you all and maybe put some ideas in your head about biogas or other climate related technologies that we can help implement into charter reform and charter adoption. Thank you.
Danielle, can I just jump in on this? Because actually there's a number of model
Heba, you have jumped in perfectly at the right time, because I'm about to invite you and Augusto back in our room.
Ah, okay.
because is Augusto with us? Yeah. Can we get him back into the room with us? It is so inviting, actually, to hear from the two of you, your observations on some of the things that have been said. And Heba, you have the floor first.
I was just going to say that there are increasing numbers of model UN Charter Review conferences. So rather than just model UN conferences, now, for example, here in Brazil, there's a university that is doing in September a model charter review conference where youth can come and bring their ideas of what the new charter should look like. And that's at the university level, but I think there's also at the high school level some work like this. And then as part of that, we're going to be doing a whole series of kind of video campaigns with youth voicing their desires for what a new UN Charter should look like. And that's a model we'd then like to do
in other... You're saying such good things that you're being reverberated like 100 times. So are you okay with the sound?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's fine. It's great. Okay.
So just to say that can you mute? Yeah.
So if they wanted to start one like that, even under the UNA, with collaboration with UNA, for example, or other, as you know, there are the UN associations everywhere in the world. What would be your suggestion on how they would do that?
Well, I'd say get in touch with well, you can get in touch with us, or UNA may already have examples of this, but certainly the colleagues here in Brazil would be very happy to share their experiences of doing this. And then we hope to then use that as a model that can be replicated in other places and to do a global campaign. And Kome, you were saying, nobody's going to talk about Article 108. We need advocacy tools. I totally agree. And so what we'd like to do is down the road organize a global campaign where youth from around the world can voice their opinions about what they want in a new UN Charter, and hopefully develop some tools that you can then use to talk about this issue in your own communities around the UN we need, or organize events, post on your social media feeds, have a kind of supporters program where anyone can get involved and help spread the word. So we're quite new. We're still putting in place all the pieces, but that's definitely part of the ambition, and absolutely would not only love to have your voices as part of it, but I think A, we absolutely need it, and B, it's very, very possible. So thanks for your engagement on this.
And Augusto, you have a second charter. I have a quick question for you. Is that second charter available in other languages, or is it in English? Or is it possible for us to use AI to help do some translations?
Okay. Happy to announce that the Spanish and the Russian versions of the charter are available on the website of the Global Governance Forum, and the French version is going to make its way within the next week or so.
Perfect. And what else would you like to observe or make a concluding remark from your wisdom? You have so much experience, so share. Unmuted. We have you muted. Ashley, can you help Augusto there?
Yep.
Thank you.
So you had asked a follow-up question, but I couldn't hear it. If you could
yes, no, what I was saying that from what you've heard today from everyone in the panel, did you want to make some observations, some suggestions?
I wanted to complement something that Heba had said in connection with this experiment of with young people here in Brazil, which is led by one of the professors here in Sao Paulo. There is a similar exercise taking place in India, in which the Global Governance Forum has participated in the last 3 years. The largest Montessori school in the world is actually located in India. It has 60,000 students in 17 campuses. And the director, Gita Kingdom, who used to be a lecturer in economics at Oxford University, England, for more than 20 years, is spearheading a very interesting initiative that essentially aims to bring to all the students in the school this idea of UN Charter reform and the need to sort of modernize our global governance architecture. Last year, I attended a conference that they organize every year, and I was extremely impressed just with the level of dexterity of the students and their understanding of the contents of the second charter. And we're speaking not about 20 or 30, we're speaking about hundreds of them, if not perhaps thousands, because the school is very large. In addition, although this doesn't include young people, but it's actually at the other spectrum of the demographic population, this school organizes annually a conference for judges from Supreme Courts and from constitutional courts. I attended the conference last year, and there were like 250 judges from the highest level courts in a large number of countries. And there were 2 days of full consultations around the second charter. And this was very important because, judges, they are very influential in their respective countries. They set the tone on many issues. They have credibility. Many of them have lifetime tenure. And so for them to be gathering once a year to discuss UN reform is tremendously significant. And so I just wanted to bring this to your attention, because Heba is absolutely right. We need to socialize these ideas and take them to young people, to the business community, to civil society organizations for sure, which she's already doing in the context of the coalition. Because in the end, I think that reform will come when pressure comes from below. States are not going to take, I think, the most important role in this reform process. Many of them have a vested interest in preserving the status quo. Others see themselves as being concerned with other, crises, managing the short term, the next month, the next 2 months. Unfortunately, that is one of the limitations of governance, that your bandwidth gets taken up by crisis and the day-to-day management of a nation. Civil society organizations will lead the way, and I think that young people will be as well. And I am very encouraged by what I have heard and the extent to which you are bringing young people into this conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I'm going to give each of our panelists there, Kame and Jessica and Cash, to share with us something from your point of view. I said I was going to ask, what would be your ask for your government, whether it's your mayor or your governor or your president in the United States? What would be your ask at this point? Cash, come on.
That's a really loaded question. I think I would ask a lot of things.
You're on the record. Sorry, you're on the record here.
I think I would ask a lot of things. I think the main one for me is to really prioritize youth inclusion. And I think that's something that we've been talking about a lot today, but it's something that really needs to be said, in that a lot of youth inclusion in governmental spaces is really only for show. It's not real youth inclusion. They're not being heard at the table with the same table as these career politicians or people like that who don't really prioritize youth voice. And I feel like oftentimes, especially in my work, I've seen that we're kind of relegated to the sidelines in a more of a performative space. People want their youth stamp of approval without actually taking into account any of the ideas that we have. And I know a lot of these things also relate to climate because that's one of the main ways in which youth attempt to create change in their communities. But many organizations are powerless to enforce this kind of change. And I want to also bring attention to a story that I heard through a lecture, actually, about the Ogoni people of Nigeria, and that they suffered deeply from oil pollution and were denied justice by governmental spheres in Nigeria, in the UN, just worldwide. They were kind of relegated to a space of powerlessness despite international attention. And I feel like that is seen everywhere across the world, and we really need to bring attention to that as youth as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that one. Kome, what's your ask?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit closer to what Kat just said, but it would really be about the ability to access more AI tools for education, reforms, and activism. Just having access to those tools, and it could be in forms of seminars, workshops, it could be in terms of some digital grants that are given out, or even access to some of the paid version of those tools, but really to help young people access tools that can help promote the level of sustainable changes that we require.
Global citizenship, curricula, required course. Jessica, I know you just want everyone to memorize the Pact for the Future and get onto all the working groups. But can I just throw out there also something that I see happening, which is increasingly more at the local level, youth councils within councils. So you have a Human Rights Commission, but you have a youth council within that. You have a Women's Gender Equality Commission, but you have a youth council within it with their independence, but well integrated sort of institutional change, which means that it's just not ad hoc. I just wanted to share that as what I'm seeing, and Jessica's going to give her recommendation for her governor.
Yes, so reforming the charter provides an opportunity to find common ground and increase mutual understanding amidst differing interests. The urgency to reform has been knocking on humanity's door. Why not give it a try and see what areas the charter can be changed? This can mean allowing decisive decisions to be made that can save lives, de-escalate conflicts, and stabilize relations. To those seeking more understanding about the need for charter reform, it may actually help to explain if I use local examples. In San Francisco, there have been calls for charter reform with the goal to improve city governance. Take Los Angeles for another example. Charter Reform Commission meeting 1 took place on June 10th, 2025, and another one took place on June 17th. And on the LA Charter Reform Commission's website, you see the recording, agenda, minutes, public comments, and other information relevant to that day's meeting. The city also sees a need to modernize and make operations more efficient. Simply put, when time progresses and society changes, the administrative body needs to keep pace and better align itself. A reform should happen if there is a need to. Now, looking at what's happening at the UN and what's happening globally, there is clearly a need to reform, to improve how the UN functions in relation to social progression since the UN Charter was signed and put into force in 1945. International engagements must be conducted that best serve the needs of the people and effectively address global challenges. Back to you, Dr. Yoon.
I wanna hire Jessica as our advocate.
There you are. You can. She's available.
Thank you.
I have been asked to share with you a short reflection on the process, on this event, and I just want to share as an anthropologist that what I see happening culturally is very destructive, which is we have adopted somehow a mythology of individualism, that somehow I, me, and mine are the center of our world, and that somehow I can decide my own destiny by myself. And as a social scientist, this is untrue, and it leads us down the wrong path because we do not see ourselves as part of the social fabric. So that we do need to remember that every action that we do has a reaction. and that every country's action has an impact on the global ecology in which we survive. So I wanted to leave that anthropological thought with you. We do need to destroy this myth of the individual. We have freedoms, but we don't have the kind of liberties that we think free from the others around us. And I will return our program back to Ashley, who needs to say something about UNA San Francisco as well. Ashley?
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. Thank you, Kome. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Heba. Thank you, Cash. Thank you, Augusto. This has been a remarkable conversation, and I want to share with you all that part of my purpose of bringing you into this space was so that we could incorporate more youth voices in the leadership team that is seeking the reforms of the charter. This isn't something I had a preconceived notion about. This was something that I was curious to learn more. And I am over the moon with information right now of different ideas that were shared on how to reform, how the challenges of overcoming a narrative that we're going to somehow reform and create something less than what is in existence today is nonsensical. Having the Pact for the Future, incorporating future generations in the reform dialogue will inevitably create something stronger for our future generations to thrive, survive, and sustain peaceful outcomes at your home, in your community, and beyond. So with that, I want to thank every single one of you for joining us for this conversation today. We're going to be taking some of the questions that were added in the chat that we did not have an opportunity to address, and we will be adding them to our website along with the recording. This is the beginning of a conversation for UNA USA San Francisco chapter to continue to explore avenues to improve on our systems, and that improvement can come when we bring in the future generations. As everyone said, you are not leaders of tomorrow, you are leaders of today. And it is time that we make space for you to be part of this dialogue. So I appreciate you all. Please be well on this summer afternoon, this summer evening in Brazil. Thank you so much to your colleagues. And I am looking forward to ongoing collaboration and dialogue. Thank you very much. Jessica, may I ask for you to hit the pause?
Yes, no problem. Let me just hit the pause button.